Thank you, Captain Westmoreland, so much for your introduction. And I would like at this time to introduce our panel that we have with us this morning. A brief introduction for all of you. We have with us Becky Walk, who is the Executive Director of the Maybe Center in Fort Worth, Texas. And it is a 24-hour facility that provides meals and housing and a long-term residential treatment program for chemically dependent women and their children, and a veterans enrichment program, just to name a few, even though I feel like I've mentioned so many already. We have with us Megan L. Corchi, who works in sales full-time, but is also a part of the leadership team at her church, where she is involved in the anti-human trafficking ministry called 121 Hope Ministry. And we also have with us Hope Wilson, who is the program specialist for vulnerable populations at the Salvation Army's national headquarters. And some of her work that she does includes building strategies that positively impact these populations that she works with. And last but not least, we have Captain Claudia Roseno, who her and her husband serve as the Corps officers of the Lawton Corps in Oklahoma. And through her efforts, she has created a community steering committee and played a key role in poverty being voted as one of the top 5 issues that the city will focus on for the next 5 years. And I feel like I have to mention we are both proud Georgia Bulldogs, so go Dogs! And to get our panel started on that note, I want to start at the beginning of how you got involved in this work and in these ministries that you're a part of today. How did you get involved?
I really think it started at 8 years old. And, you know, I think just on the playground one day with a young 8-year-old who was by herself and just really felt sorry for her. And through the years, even being with the Salvation Army for 10 years has allowed me an opportunity. And just knowing that now the stats that we know, even in this hour, within this 1 hour, there are 115 children who are under the age of 15 who are being sold right now in our states, in the United States. This is not worldwide, this is just in our nation. So those are gut-wrenching numbers for us, and that's why.
My segue into social justice ministry started in college. When I took a food ethics class, I learned about the tomato pickers in Immokalee, Florida, and I was absolutely shocked to find out that we have slaves in the U.S. today. So I had no idea before that about human trafficking in the U.S. at all. And then a year later, my church started a anti-human trafficking ministry, and I thought, this is my chance to get involved and actually make an impact.
And before I answer that question, I really want to say that I am so honored to be in front of all these Esthers who are born at such a time. Really, that's not a mantra, that is so true. I am so jealous. I wish that when I was growing up, someone had that same vision to have us all together, to empower us. So I just want to ask you to give a round of applause to Kano Heidi, who had this vision to bring all of us here. Thank you. All right, so in case you're wondering where my accent is from, I'm originally from Uganda. I was born and raised in Uganda. So for me, the issue of social justice is something kind of found me growing up in a country that was ravaged with protracted civil wars. I was exposed to human rights violations, especially of women and children. And I had this hard cry. I knew I had to do something. And throughout my education, this has been my goal, to educate myself on issues and to have a voice for me to be able to speak and articulate the issues that are affecting people. So for me, it is a calling. It's not something that I chose, it chose me.
And for me, I grew up with parents who are very involved in social justice. My parents, they would not have called it social justice. They're now retired officers, but they would have called it just loving Jesus from head to toe and every way in between. When we moved to Atlanta, Georgia as a little girl, I saw them working very hard with the immigrating population in Atlanta. They were very vulnerable to exploitation, to predators. They didn't know how the educational system worked. They had the people that they knew, they had bosses that took advantage of them, and it took advantage of the dream that they had to come to the United States and make their lives better. But I saw my parents working with those individuals every day, and it was just loving Jesus is what they did. And then through that, that's kind of the passion that I have. And then God called me to become an officer, and He did it in a very interesting way. I was at a conference, a Salvation Army conference, Root, lots of years ago, and I was at a class that was talking about breaking generational poverty. By Major Ronnie Robbins, and she said one phrase, and I don't know what it was about that phrase, but she's talking, and then she said, "God help our children." And that struck me, and God said, "You're going to help those children." Me, Lord? You're going to help them, you're going to give them Jesus, and give them a new way of life. All right, Lord, you're going to do it, but I'll just follow behind what you have me to do. I never knew that was my call to officership, but I didn't realize that that's actually the specific work that I'm doing right now in Lawton, Oklahoma. So it's a great passion of getting individuals holistically out of poverty.
It's so interesting to hear how you all got involved and how your passion kind of grows even in the work that you are doing. And Megan, I think an interesting point in your involvement is that your full-time job is in sales and it's not in social justice work, but you are so involved in your church leadership and in the ministry that you have. Can you tell us a little bit about how you balance your work, but as well as your involvement in social justice work and your personal life as well?
Well, it's certainly challenging, but divvying up my time on paper really helps. It helps me to remember to do everything that I need to do, and also to make sure that I'm allocating the appropriate time for each task. And also remembering that I work in sales, not life or death, so, reminding myself when to quit and move on to the next thing. And social justice is really important to me, so I have to just quit what I'm doing at work and move on to the next thing.
I live in the Washington, D.C. area where even on my commute to work and back home, there is so much injustice that you come face to face with, even with your own two eyes. Poverty and homelessness, sex trafficking, it's right there in front of me. And so many people feel called and passionate to do something about that, to speak out against it, but they don't know how. And I think they run into this problem of where do I begin and how can I get involved? Hope, can you tell us a little bit about what you think is the best way we can get involved with that passion?
Sure. First of all, having passion is one of the key ingredients. Advocacy is predicated on passion. So once you have that, I would encourage you to educate yourself on the issue. And sometimes you feel that you are the only person, but actually there are always people who might be concerned about the same issue. But the other thing to be aware of is that the stories and the things you see, your representatives really want to hear from you. You'll be surprised, as you know you work in Congress, the representatives will speak on those issues that have been brought to them by the people that they represent. So don't be afraid to get up, to pick up that phone, or even to make an appointment and say you want to go and speak to your representative. You have those stories are powerful. So you start from there, but I also am going to say that sometimes it's hard to work alone. So trying to look and search for people again who are working on those issues and try to cooperate and coordinate your work with them.
And Claudia, for our officers, not every appointment is associated with a shelter or a program, or even a social justice ministry that has already been in place. How would you encourage fellow officers to start those programs and build a ministry in social justice work?
Before I really get into the specifics of what we're doing, I just have the song that we sing, Storm the Forts of Darkness, and this is kind of why we're doing what we're doing in our community, even if you might not have a shelter or other ways that you're doing, or other ministries. And this is what those words say. The day, let me make sure okay. Soldiers of God, arise. The day is drawing nearer. Shake the slumber from your eyes. The light is growing clear. Sit no longer idly by while the heedless millions die. Lift the bloodstained banner high and take the field for Jesus. We have the chorus and it says, storm the forts of darkness, bring them down, put down the devil's kingdom where he holds dominion. Storm the forts of darkness, bring them down, glory honor to the Lamb, praise and power to the Lamb. Glory, honor, praise, and power be forever to the Lamb. Then the second part, see the brazen host of hell, their art and power employing. We see that in social justice. More than human tongue can tell, the blood-bought souls destroying. Hark from ruin's ghastly road, victims groan beneath their load. Forward, O ye sons of God, and dare or die for Jesus. Warriors of the risen King, great army of salvation, spread his fame, his praises sing, and conquer every nation. Raise the glorious standard higher, work for victory, never tire, march forward, march with blood and fire, and win the world for Jesus. While that song talks about salvation and the Lord, this is the social justice. That's what I'm taking it as. That's darkness, that's evil, and we can conquer it. God's called us to conquer it. I am no way, I think about how we began the poverty task force in our town. We decided to go on this program called Bridges Out of Poverty, really looking at the philosophies of poverty, looking at the person holistically. Many individuals, organizations, the city, your cities, your state, look at it as just that individual in poverty. Let's look and make sure that they have their education. Let's fix their needs. But there's really other causes of poverty. Community conditions, state, city, national policies that just don't let them get ahead. And then there's exploitation. So we're doing that in our town, and I have my warrior women of other agencies that we've prayed together to really conquer that. But then I thought, okay, God, where do you want me to go from here? You know, and one of them said, Claudia, you need to be at this health department meeting. Like, health department? You know, I'm a Corps officer. What am I going to do at the health department? No, Claudia, be at this health department meeting. It's like, okay, you know, I trust you. I trust the Lord. I'll be at that. I don't know what I'm going to say. So I was there, and there are the heads of all the hospitals in town, the directors of the military hospital in town, these people that really know about health. And they're talking medical terminology that I don't understand. I'm in my mind saying, Lord, why did you have me here? Why am I here at this meeting? And then they started talking about the homeless in our community and their health, or the children in the street, or the parents that are doing, and they didn't understand why the poor people have cell phones. You know, why do they? And so I was like, oh, Lord, I hear you. And so I was able to answer at that moment, okay, Lord, I see where you're taking me. Let me be bold. Let me be strong. You give me the courage because I don't have it. You give me the strength because I don't have it. And the result is after that, poverty is one of the top health issues, was voted as one of the top health issues because God said, speak now. And the Salvation Army is joining organizations together to really combat poverty in our town. I know I spoke a lot, Joy. I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much. And Becky, you have over 10 years of experience in working in social justice. What has been one of the biggest challenges for you in your work?
That's a really good question. I think one of the biggest frustrations that I have personally is the fire and why can't we do more and why aren't we doing more? And I think a lot of that comes from a lot of people don't know what to do. And it's as simple as if social media is your outlet, you know, tell your friends, start getting that movement going. It's very frustrating when you see survivors coming out of the life who are in jail. We work with a judge right now that we have 14 survivors that we're working with. And as we peel back the layers of their success, we then put them into housing. And so we don't have a safe house, which is a frustration, but we work through that with the other programs. And so it's like we're not allowing that barrier, the enemy, keep that barrier there. We're just going to trudge forward and make accommodations for survivors. They like to be called survivors. They're not prostitutes. That's something that I think is very important as we learn their language, our survivors' language. You've got to know their jargon and their lingo, or you're not going to be able to get through. And they just need us to model Christ. They don't need us to do anything in the beginning, but just to love them and accept them.
And Megan, can you share a story with us about a specific instance where you saw in your ministry at your church social justice happening and injustice being overcome?
Well, recently and I don't know if this is necessarily social justice being overcome, but this is a pretty inspiring story in my opinion. We've been shadowing a ministry that does strip club outreach, and we've just started for the past couple of months, but recently one of the dancers has begun going to church with the leader of the ministry in Tampa. So that was really inspiring to me because you kind of have to go into that knowing that you might not see the fruits of your labor, you're just planting the seeds. But that was just kind of some progress we saw, and so it was really inspiring to see God work in that way.
And Becky, I know that you have many stories that you could share with us, but could you share one as well?
Sure. Well, let me ask the audience, how many of you know a 12-year-old? Raise your hand. Yeah. How many of you have a 12-year-old in your family? So that is the average age of a child who's being trafficked right now. And I think that one of the things that the biggest success story that we have right now is one of our survivors who was trafficked at the age of 8 years old. Her stepfather sold her to his friends, and on an average of 5 to 6 times a night, while mom was in the other room and allowed it. And then she went on to a lifestyle that was very promiscuous. We were fortunate to get her at the age of 42 years old. So you can imagine the years and the years of damage that she had. She went back to school. She graduated with a bachelor's degree. We helped her with that. She's now living in housing, and she's been a graduate of ours for 3 years. She comes back and speaks to our clients, to our survivors. We have reunited her with certain family members. She comes to aftercare. So she's doing really well. But it's still taking that long. But it took 2 years just to peel back those layers piece by piece.
And Hope, how has your work in social justice on a broad scale changed your relationship with God on a personal level?
Well, that's a great question. I think I have to say initially I'm very passionate, and when I'm passionate about something, I tend to go in full speed. And I think that in the beginning, I was more like Goliath. Like I would go in with this impressive armor. I know what the issues are. I feel confident I can speak about this. And I feel that I lacked the faith and humility of David. Because in this work, compassion fatigue is real. Because especially the stuff I do, I'm more on the policy side. I'm not doing direct services. And when you're dealing with policy issues, you have to be there for the long haul. It takes time to convince policymakers that this is something that is systematic, that is structural, that needs to be changed. And I think what this has taught me really is to come to this work with a posture of humility. But humility doesn't mean weakness. It's just really becoming small and letting God be God. And when you have that, I'm telling you, the sky is the limit.
And I want to share some statistics with you. There are right now in the United States 45.3 million people who live in poverty, and 1 in 5 children in America go to sleep hungry at night. And that is actually a stat that comes up a lot among legislators where I work. And there are about 14 million United States homes that are vacant, but still 3.5 million people are homeless. And once again, where I live in the national capital, everywhere I go, just in front of my eyes, countless adult establishments and nightclubs that are there. What do you envision for the Salvation Army in the future? There are already so many programs and ministries in place, but how can we see those numbers decrease? And how can we further our efforts to see those numbers change? Becky?
Prevention, that is the biggest key right there. I think because our young boys and our children are getting exposed to so much, If you have after-school care programs, that is a really good way to get information in front of our children, in front of parents. We'll have single moms that come to us and say, I wish I had this information when I was taking John to the Boys and Girls Club. I wish you taught me the signs to look for on the internet, because they're out there, they're going to get them. So it's almost, you have to do a lot of prevention.
And Megan, your ministry is not within the Salvation Army, but your church works with the Salvation Army in some ways. And how do you think we can work together with other organizations and ministries in our community to widen our efforts?
Well, actually, I think partnering with local churches more would be a great idea. Getting more exposure out there, because I really wasn't fully aware of the extent of the Salvation Army until I came here this weekend. And I'm really impressed and really grateful to be here and see all of this. But I think getting more exposure and getting into the local churches, because, we have so many resources, but maybe not the guidance on how to use them sometimes. And I think you guys have a lot of great programs and would be a great model to use.
Captain Claudia, what do you envision? As women of the Salvation Army, what can we do?
One of the barriers to breaking poverty is thinking that the poor will always be with us. Now, we might not have that idea in the Salvation Army, but the rest of our communities do. Sourcing, helping each other, finding outside agencies, that's what has helped us. Outside agencies that we can form together and really have a raw conversation. Are we enabling poverty? Are our social services, our programmings for kids, are we enabling poverty? And having that conversation to see, okay, we're putting a Band-Aid, really, in some of our things. So how can we really heal that wound? And not just in that individual, but the wound in our communities.
As they say, sometimes when you have a hammer, you always think that the nails are the answer to everything. So I just want to put that out there. I'm going to tell you a story that I heard, but I think that is going to drive this home. There were these cows in the field that were dying, and they brought in people and they showed them where the cows were, and they talked to the owner, and they said, what do you think is happening to these cows? And they're like, maybe it's the grass that the cows are eating. And others thought, maybe the caretaker is not doing a great job. But then what happened, when they gave them a bigger picture where the cows are, there was a plant that was letting out all this fume. So then they asked them, what do you think is killing the cows? And it was obvious, right? It was not the grass. It wasn't because the caretaker was not doing a great job. And I think how we tell stories is so important. You heard me say that you have the power, you can go and tell those stories, but how you tell them is so important, because sometimes when you tell those stories, like, well, it's that one person, well, I feel sorry for them, but there's no real understanding that these are structural issues that needs to be addressed. But when you pull back and you show them that picture, and I think that's what you have, because you are the troops on the front lines. You see these people day in and day out, and it's not because they're lazy, it's not because they're not trying, they don't want to be self-sufficient, and that's where you come in. And I think for me, I see Salvation Army, part of what I do in Washington, D.C. is to be part of different coalitions, think tanks that are working on these issues, but the reason why they consider us so important to their coalitions is because we have the stories. We can tell them, give them that panoramic view. And I think that you need to think more of your work, not just as a direct transaction that you do, but to actually see how everything is interrelated. Why does the mother not being able to take care of the child? Because they don't have consistent hours, right? So that is a structural issue. So I think the vision that I would like you all to go with is to take what you're doing and try to look back and then see that this is not enough. Giving shelter is great. Providing food for people is great, but when you're doing that day in and day out, you have to ask those questions, what is happening here? And I think when you connect those dots, that passion is gonna move you ahead to advocating for structural changes.
I think we all could spend so much more time listening to their incredible stories and experiences, but we are out of time. But thank you all so much for joining us this morning, and if we can give them a round of applause. Thank you.